Howdy YouTubers, Jason Lawrence here. If you've been following my YouTube videos on MSR Whisperlite and Whisperlite International stove modification to run on alcohol, you'll appreciate the latest update. My wife and I have done some high altitude and extreme weather testing in the Colorado Rockies and wilderness in and around Nederland, Colorado. Today's the 20th of February, 2015, and as I sit here now, it's snowing outside. We just returned from our third annual winter expedition, and you'll see in this picture my wife working with her MSR Whisperlite stove, where we made extensive use of both hers and my stoves. The trip we took lasted 3 days. We spent 2 nights. One particularly frigid night that I'm going to focus on in this conversation, and then I'm going to show you a video of one of the stoves in operation at about 10,600 feet. So let's get to that. First, the primary test conditions, or the most extreme test conditions. Really quickly, here's a picture of the area where we were camping in the Roosevelt National Forest, generally near the Brainerd Lake recreation area and right on the border with Indian Peaks Wilderness. The reason this is important is because much of the data that I have available to me is from the Niwot Ridge meteorological location, and the picture I'll show you quickly. Here is the Brainerd Lake recreation area. When I was doing testing the first night we got out to our campsite, the thermometer on my watch stopped working, and I've since done some research and discovered that the watch thermometer stops working at 14 degrees. So when I thought my sensing equipment had failed, no, that wasn't necessarily the case. It was actually extremely cold temperatures the night we happened to be out. So the best next data that I had available was that recorded from the Niwot Ridge test locations. I'll zoom in here quickly to where we were camped, and you'll recognize the configuration of the lake, 2 roundabout circles for cars to enter an area, and we were up on this ridge line approximately here. This is relevant because the best data that I can get for atmospheric information is right here at these test facilities. Specifically, I'm going to focus in on the saddle location and down here at what's called the C1 location, because somewhere in between these two is a pretty good representation of where we were testing on this particular night and couple of days. The further video that comes after me speaking here takes place the next day. I didn't make a video of testing that night for obvious reasons and for reasons that I explain further in the video. But the weather data that I was able to backtrack specifically to the saddle, it's located at about 11,600 feet. You can go to the map here. We departed at approximately 10 in the morning on the 17th of February. So if you look here at the temperature and see, this is about noon where my cursor is. This is about 6 p.m. when we would have started using the stoves. Temperature was roughly minus 14.5 degrees. Can also extract barometric pressure and wind speed from these plots as well. But that's not the same altitude. So I went to another location and looked at the C1 data. Again, here's about noon, come over to about 6 p.m. and we're looking at about minus 10-ish C, and again here's wind speed, average wind speed data and barometric pressure. The barometric pressure may be important to someone who wants to do a bit more research in terms of how the stoves behave. So I input this information into Excel, and the C1 location 9912, the saddle at 11572, and then our camp location was at about 10560. And I did a simple linear interpolation. I think LERP is common lingo, and just to keep this as simple as possible. I've already made it much more complicated than it needs to be. But the low altitude site was recording about 11C, as I said, the high altitude about 14C. The interpolation would put us at about 12, minus 12.6, which would make sense if my watch thermometer only goes down to 14. The dashes that I was reading were because we were sensing about 9.6 ambient temperature. Also did a linear interpolation of the wind speed, which is highly inaccurate, especially when it comes to trees, but again, for simple use of a wind chill chart, I went ahead and did this anyway and came up with about 16.6 and 9.6 in terms of the speed and temperature, which puts us in the range of, go here to about 10 degrees and about 15 miles an hour, about minus 7 degrees wind chill. And this is important because my wife noticed that her fingers were sticking to her stove. We were both using our stoves independently, and we both obviously noticed that the temperature was pretty intense. It also has an impact when lubricating. I like to spit on the connection between the bottle and the hose housing that goes to the body of the stove and the heat exchanger, because it lubricates that O-ring, and that obviously becomes a challenge when your tongue is sticking to those metal parts. But we managed to adapt and overcome anyway. Why am I doing this? For a number of reasons I go on into in other videos, multiple fuels, and I'm documenting this because I've had requests like those from Mikhail Svarka. He's a fellow from Slovakia who sent me a specific piece of equipment to test the MSR stove. And we have the luxury in Colorado of having access to altitudes like 10, 11, 12, 13,000 feet and intense winter temperatures. So I figure for the benefit of the public knowledge, I'd share the information that I determined from this particular test. Here's a couple of quick pictures of exactly what it is that I'm talking about. This is the component here that Mikhail sent me. It allows a person to use their finger, and again I go into a lot of detail in other videos, to adjust the airflow into the jet area of the MSR. This is an international, you can tell by how thick this heat exchanger is, without modifying the jet itself. I've modified a jet personally. And I prefer this method because it allows me to take a bottle of white gas, plug it into the stove, open this valve all the way, and run the stove normally. Or I can take a bottle of ethanol, methanol, I've tested E85, isopropyl, denatured alcohol, can put that in, and using this air metering device and the same jet run the stove at what seems to be pretty reasonable efficiency. So this is my setup, and then the setup you'll see in the video that my wife is using is this one here. This is showing her valve full open, and this valve is simply a bit of brass hose hardware I had lying around, but a person could pick up at a hardware store that has a perfect inner diameter for these stoves. Hers is a standard Whisperlite, you can see by the thinner heat exchange pipe. And incidentally, this is the piece that I described getting my tongue stuck to, a little tongue-tied there, and when we were testing it. approximately 10 degrees Fahrenheit outside with a -7 wind chill. So that can be a factor, we noticed. But otherwise, this stove performed beautifully, and I'll show you another picture of her stove in a partially closed configuration. We've found that about this size of orifice is ideal for her stove when running on denatured alcohol or ethanol. And ethanol could be purchased over the counter if you're over 21 in the form of grain alcohol. In the United States, one brand I know of at least one brand, 98%, 99%. Getting 100% ethanol is pretty challenging just because of how strongly alcohol bonds with water, apparently, I'm learning. So here's her setup. I simply drilled a hole through this brass hardware that was the same diameter as the standard setup for MSR, and went ahead and ran it. So the rest of the video I'm going to leave to you to watch if you're interested, and goes into some of her personal experience with using the stove. Again, this data here is just to share with you some of the numbers that we were dealing with, and then of course the wind chill that we encountered on one particular night, in case someone wants to add to this data how MSR Whisperlite and Whisperlite International stoves behave running on an alternative fuel and with a modified jet, whether that be the slide valve I showed you that Mikkel sent me from Slovakia, or the jet modification that I did on our stove in a previous video using a drill bit, or in a third case, the metering adjustment I did with a brass fitting we had lying around at the house. Whatever a person comes up with, these stoves definitively will run effectively in extreme temperatures and at what I would consider extreme altitudes. And we've run this test, this stove up to 11,000 feet, both stoves, with wonderful success, and we've come to depend on them for our winter backpacking trip. We don't bring white gas into the backcountry, even in the winter, with us anymore. We simply don't need it. We trust the stoves enough. And certainly this trip recently further validates that. So that's enough of me talking from that angle. I'm going to leave you to watch the video, get some insights from Alexandra. Please also check out some of the other videos. I get a lot of questions from various videos suggesting to me that people aren't seeing all of them. They're all up on my YouTube channel, which you can find connected to this video here. And please take advantage of those. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I would love to hear how other people are testing their stoves, or some recommendations for test conditions that I may not have considered. This is simply the best of what I can do here. If I go higher, or if we encounter colder, I'm not sure that I want to do a whole lot colder, because it just frankly gets pretty dangerous to be able to film at the same time. I'm not concerned about being in those conditions. I got to have my hands free, and I've got to be able to work a camera, keep the batteries warm. All of those factors become very challenging, and if it's that cold and windy and everything else, my primary focus is not on making a video. But who knows, maybe in time I'll get excited about that. So again, hit me up with your comments, questions, and would love to hear what you all are doing with your stoves. Thanks. Today is
18th.
Wednesday the
18th. It's Gracie's birthday.
A friend of ours has a birthday today. I don't know if that's showing up. Outside temperature, not sure, not terribly relevant. We are melting water, as is common for us, at about 10,600 feet. And this stove has been modified to run on, there's the altitude, to run on denatured alcohol, ethanol, methanol, and alternative fuel. It will also run on white gas.
I can't hear this.
Yeah?
I can't hear this while you're talking.
I'll be our second day. Last night was super cold. Someone we ran into today estimated possibly 5 degrees. We were running both of our alcohol stoves, MSR Whisperlite and Whisperlite International, modified to run on alcohol. Last night too, we were running them both to melt water for drinking. We estimate about 10-to-1 ratio water to fuel. So about 1 ounce of fuel will generate about 10 ounces of water at a boil. And that's a rough estimate that we use for planning. But we have found that even in extreme conditions, and extreme so far only tested as high as 11,000 feet, but 11,000 feet as well as extreme cold, I ventured to guess that the wind chill last night was below 0. The stove still performed beautifully, running on alcohol, denatured alcohol and ethanol. So right now you can see it's already starting to melt the snow. It certainly takes longer than white gas, but is much less noxious to deal with. And yes, we do also need to carry a bit more, but it offers us some options that previously we didn't have. So, previous videos I've done have been in the kitchen, on the porch, demonstrating our 2 modified stoves, and here it is in real time and rugged conditions, doing its thing. What do you think using the stove with alcohol?
What in comparison to white gas?
Either way.
Not a huge difference apart from white gas probably burns a little hotter. But no, with the modification on the stove, the air valve modification on the stove, you don't really see much of a difference.
Is it more complicated to use?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Given the choice between white gas and alcohol, which would you choose?
You know who you're talking to, right? Alcohol, ethanol.
We definitely both choose alcohol for a number of reasons. We're trying to purge fossil fuels from our experience, and this is yet one other way. People point to nylon and they point to industrial processes and what have you. Fine, we're whittling away one piece at a time, and one essential piece is how we make water on a winter camping trip. It is the middle of February, and this is essential. Our life revolves around melting water when we come out here on these winter trips. Lexi's not new at using the Whisperlite. She's become quite adept recently, and even with the modification, she's able to prime, start, and use the stove without significant difficulty. But that was a bit of a progression. We both had our challenges early on, didn't we?
I have a little MSR Whisperlite stove trauma.
Well, you're not alone in that. I'll bet Reese Witherspoon does now too after filming her most recent adventure. So that's it. We're featuring the stove, and I promised some folks that I would show some higher altitude and other conditions testing. Other videos were at 8,300 feet at our house in Netherlands, and pretty benign conditions. A kitchen isn't terribly tough to deal with. But out here, and especially last night, I thought about making a video, but my fingers were sticking to the bottle, and frankly, making water was more important than making a video for you all, so please forgive me and just trust that it was wicked cold, and the stove still did wonderfully. And the test that we did at 11,000 feet, I did not misspeak. We are at 10.6 now, roughly. This test we did at 11,000 feet was with this same stove, my wife's modified stove, and hers simply has a bit of brass hose hardware collar around the bottom that has a hole drilled through both sides, and then she can twist it to adjust the airflow, whereas mine has a little stem on it that you can rotate from afar. So we have to set hers up. That was thanks to a fella in Slovakia that mailed it to us. Mikkel Svarka. So if you're watching this, you had asked for these videos too. Thank you. We love it. It works brilliantly. And so does the brass fitting, just from parts that I had in the garage. And the stove in this configuration, the way we have Alexandra's and the way we have mine, will run both white gas and alcohol. Simply put white gas into the bottle and open the airflow metering device that you can see on other videos all the way, and it will behave just as it is in production with white gas. If you want to run alcohol, then tighten down the air metering valve using whatever construction works. And brass in this case, a little aluminum collar with a stem in the case of my stove, and both of them work brilliantly. So further higher altitude testing needs to be done. I don't feel the need to do any more cold testing. I feel satisfied with what it did last night, but if we get higher, then we'll do our best to let you know. It's tough to make those videos because I got to get the phone out while we're doing what is a primary survival, meeting a primary survival need, so you'll understand if that's not the most important thing. So here's just a little bit of how we do this process. Other people have made different techniques, but we'll go someplace that we haven't peed or pooed, or at least the best of our recollection, and make snowballs to drop them in slowly into our pot. And if you have better recommendations, then we are constantly striving to improve our water management in the backcountry. One technique that we've tested out on this particular trip is the use of a camelback on our front, and you can see that it's just hung around my neck here, and I've got a strap that goes around my neck and then another one around my waist, and it holds the camelback right up against my belly so I can also melt snow while we're walking. And it seems to be as effective as Alexandra's with the algae, doesn't it? Doesn't necessarily have an advantage. So she'll show you here that she does the same thing under her jacket, 5, 6, 18 layers. Put a little snow into the Nalgene, and we hold it right up against our body while we're hiking to melt it. It's generally frowned upon to eat snow for a number of reasons. It's a great mindfulness exercise to hike with a bladder full of snowy water or a Nalgene full of snowy water so you can monitor your body temperature. Our goal is no sweat when we come out here in the winter, because it's just too difficult to recover once you start sliding down that very insidious slope of hypothermia. So we're super conscious of that possibility, and we don't allow any space for it. But hiking with a bladder or a bottle on our front, we can feel it, and then we can monitor whether or not we hike faster or slower, put on another layer, but at the same time we're melting water, so it becomes a bit of a mindfulness practice. And I'll shut up and just let you listen to the hum of the stove and marvel at the scenery.